Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. It is the end of 2017. I know what that means, kids. Yes, arbitrary lists, discussions, and arguments. It's our favourite, isn't it? At the end of every year, I do a top 10 list. My top 10 list is based on a single factor, and that factor is how much fun did I have with that this year? 2017 is going to be a bit of a weird one. It's a weird one for a number of reasons, not least of which there were a ton of great games that came out this year that I just didn't play. Myriad of reasons for that, foremost of which being my health, which hasn't been very good at all this year. So I haven't really had the ability to play everything that I would like to, or really focus on some of the things that probably would have made it onto the list had I been able to do that. But since it is merely a meaningless list, and it is a list based entirely on the things that I had fun with this year, what's missing from it is perhaps the least relevant thing I can think of. So without further ado, let's engage in this fruitless exercise. Here is my top 10 games of 2017 list, accompanied by some honourable mentions. Yeah, that's basically what happens when you can't be bothered to properly curate your list down to 10. You just shove the rest in honourable mentions and everything's fine. That's how it works? Yes? Just checking? Cool. Excellent. I'm glad we have consensus on the rules. Right. Some honourable mentions. Pit People. It's not done yet. It was released in early access, which is a bit of a weird decision considering the kind of game that it is. It's a relatively casual hex-based tactics game by the Behemoth. Those are the guys who brought you Battle Block Theatre, they brought you Castle Crashers. They decided they'd make a strategy game, a turn-based strategy game, but one that had a little bit more pace to it. They also decided, you know what, we'd like you to play this in co-op if you don't mind. You don't have to, but we're going to give you the option, and we're going to make sure you've got online capability to do that. First time I played it was a few years ago at PAX, and they had custom controllers for it that were almost like fighting game sticks, and they had a giant yellow lever on them that you could satisfyingly pull to end your turn. Was there any purpose in that whatsoever? No, not really, but it did work and I would probably buy one if they made them. Quite a bit of the game is story-based, which is why I was a little bit confused that they released it in early access. The initial version that we played didn't have much of the story in yet, but it did have an arena mode as well as the multiplayer versus, and the kind of Pokemon collecting aspect for the different units was there, so I can sort of see why they do that. It is a very fun and very funny game, but a lot of the humour is reliant on the cutscenes and the scripted things that happen, most of which weren't there when they put it out in the first place. That said, though, it does have the Behemoth's signature charm to it, let's just put it that way. It's got a very weird idea of what hex-based strategy is supposed to be. In fact, you could almost consider it heresy to the very notion, because it doesn't really care about your strategic planning all that much. It doesn't even give you the ability to directly target units. Your squad will target whatever is in range based on a set of rules, and it'll just kind of do its own thing. Now, it is possible to manipulate that by making sure that, say, there's only one enemy unit within range of your 3 minimum range artillery piece. You could do that, and in fact, the game almost feels like herding cats, and I'm pretty sure that's on purpose. They took what's fun about hex-based strategy, which is leading an army and beating up the other guys, and they took away a lot of what slows it down and made it a giant mess. And somehow that's actually a good thing. Like, that plays in the favour of the game in a genre where it really has no right to. Pit People may very well be the worst turn-based strategy game I've ever actually played, and one of the most entertaining. The entire game is a cardinal sin to the genre, and they knew it. They knew it from the very start. That's what they tried to do, and I'm very interested to see what happens once they finish the thing. Now, let's deliberately make this list difficult to follow by randomly jamming honourable mentions into the otherwise organised numerical countdown, shall we? Yes, I agree. That sounds like a great idea. There's nothing that could possibly go wrong with that. Number 10. Triple Agent. It's a little-known fact that one of the most common hobbies in Reykjavik, Iceland, is to sit around a hearth while the harsh winter batters the outside of your dwelling and play social deduction games with people you don't trust. The development team behind Triple Agent Tasty Rook decided that doing this with flammable cardboard pieces was probably a fire hazard, and decided instead, why don't we just put it on a very expensive smart device? There's no chance of that being dropped into the raging flames of the hearth by somebody, absolutely not. When would that ever happen? Social deduction as a genre has been around for quite some time. Physically, you've got games such as Werewolf, you have Secret Hitler, you have Resistance, but that doesn't mean their presence in the video game genre is a recent innovation. We're starting to see certain games integrate elements of that, but there have been various versions of the social deduction game Mafia available as mods for a variety of games, going all the way back to at least Warcraft 3, if not further than that. Several similar standalone games have been made, and with the advent of voice chat and of course the use of webcams, you can create an environment that's closer to a large group of people in the same physical space, where things like physical tells start to become important. Triple Agent is only a video game by the virtue of the device that it's hosted on. The objective of the game should be pretty familiar to anybody that's played social deduction games in the past. There are two teams, the identities of which are generally hidden. The good guys are usually in the dark from the start of the game, whereas the bad guys, despite having a smaller team, have access to a little bit more information. And it's their goal to misdirect and confuse the majority team into implicating one of their own as a member of the enemy team. They have to do that without casting too much suspicion upon themselves, and the game ends actually after a single round. It's quite a nice compact experience whereby the device is passed around and used to give hidden information to each of the players. That hidden information is tracked by the device to ensure that there aren't any mistakes, and it makes sure that things are shaken up and varied with every session that you play. The game is generally over in about 10 minutes. Once each player has received a piece of hidden information, they'll have a couple of minutes to deliberate, and then they must all vote. The votes are tallied, and the person with the most votes is the one that's imprisoned, and you find out which faction they were playing for. There are, of course, a couple of other things sort of thrown into the works to make things more interesting, such as hidden sub-objectives, which may very well require a player to deliberately try and put himself in jail, or something along those lines. I've played a number of social deduction games over the years. You should be very well aware of them if you watched our Secret Hitler series. I like them a lot, especially with the right kind of people. However, they weren't all created equal. I like some more than others. Some have a tendency to drag on a little bit more than they should. Some don't give out enough information. Some give out too much information. Some have balance issues at certain player counts. I haven't found any of that with Triple Agent, and I've broken this game out a lot. And why is that? Well, it's because of the medium it's on. When I mentioned earlier that it was on a smartphone, I mean one smartphone. You don't need 9 devices, you just need one. It gets passed around the group. And the nice thing about that is that someone in your group is going to have a smartphone. Somebody can have this game installed. Even if nobody has it, it's a couple of dollars download. It's not a particularly difficult sell. Only one person needs to own it. And because the game keeps track of what's going on, gives clear instructions to each player, and has a relatively short timer on the game, it doesn't put off new players. It doesn't drag the game down. It doesn't confuse people. It's really easy to break out in almost any environment with a player count between 5 and 9. Yeah, that's very, very flexible. There are definitely situations where I've been in a group of people and wished I had a board game with me. It's as simple as that. Wished I had a social deduction game or a party game that I could just break out, but I don't, because I'm not carrying a bunch of game boxes around with me. The nice thing about this is there's no planning that goes into it. You don't have to think about playing this thing in advance. If you end up in a situation where it's obviously going to be a good idea to play it, it's right there and ready to go. And that's taken advantage of the device and the medium that it's on, rather than being limited by that. You'll find a lot of board game conversions to either tablet or phone are limited by the device that they're on, whether it be screen size, interface, something along those lines. Playing it with other people in the same place often simply doesn't work for the above reasons. Teaching can be an absolute nightmare, and most of the time you end up wishing that you had the actual physical game there with you rather than playing an inferior version of it. In this case, what you have is a game that's perfectly suited to the device, and it manages to do what an awful lot of games don't, which is provide convenience, provide fun on demand for a nice short period of time, but have a bunch of replayability in the process. Triple Agent could easily be a physical card game, but it's one of those rare occurrences where it would actually be worse off if that were the case. Number 9. The Sexy Brutale. Odd name, really wasn't going to sell a lot of copies with a name like that, let's be honest, and, well, it didn't. Regardless of what they'd called it, though, this was pretty likely going to be a fairly niche title. Brought to you by Cavalier Game Studios and Tequila Works, The Sexy Brutale is a time-traveling murder mystery. In The Sexy Brutale, you are trapped in a time loop. You're trapped in this massive mansion, and you're attempting one by one to save the guests at the mansion's party. Each of them, at some point during the game, will face a horrible death, and what's interesting about that is that every single event that can happen within the Sexy Brutale is happening on a very specific schedule. As you're trapped in the time loop, you'll notice these various patterns. You'll notice that the characters will go to the same place. They'll do the same thing, unless, of course, you interfere with it in some way. Basically, what you have simulated here is an entire mansion and an entire timetable of events that are all going on regardless of where you happen to be at the time. As the game starts, you really have absolutely no idea what's going on. You have no idea what these strange noises are in the background. You're often very much misled as to what's going on. You'll have made an assumption and believe you've figured it out, only to discover later on that it actually wasn't that at all, that something completely different happened, and the only reason you drew the initial conclusion was because of incomplete, misleading information. It is a time-traveling puzzler in which every character that you save gives you access to a new mask, which will give you other powers, which will maybe unlock parts of the mansion that you weren't able to reach before, or perform actions that you weren't able to reach before in order to save the next guest. This is all, of course, while trying to figure out why exactly you're in the time loop in the first place, who you are and why everybody is here, and what their role in the whole story is. I'm very much a sucker for time travel. I think it's interesting when you play around with the ideas of cause and effect. The Sexy Brutale does that in a way that very few games have tried before. The closest that I can think of personally would probably be Ghost Trick Phantom Detective for the original Nintendo DS. In that case, though, you were dealing with a single scene at a time. It's the complexity of the Sexy Brutale that's impressive, because you have an entire mansion's worth of events all going on, potentially at the same time, and you're only able to see little bits of it on any given attempt. That turns it into a true mystery. That turns it into something that you really have to piece together, and it makes the whole thing extremely intriguing. It's full of twists and turns and unexpected events that you don't see coming. And by the time that you reach the end of it, you can't help but marvel at the complexity of all of the pieces moving and coming together for the conclusion. The amount of planning that had to go into creating a game that can work that way is mind-blowing to me. I can't fathom it. It's a narrative with so many moving parts that all have to fit together correctly. It's a more complex story than I think you could accomplish in any other form of media, simply down to the nature of how you interact with it. You can't really just hand-wave something away as you would in a non-interactive medium. You can't just hide it behind a curtain. Everything has to work, everything has to make sense, and everything has to click together on the timetable. That was very impressive to me, and it was executed very well, if a little stunted and stilted in some places. It's a narrative risk that really paid off, and as much as I would love to see more games attempt it, I don't think there's all that many studios that have the guts or the ability to even try. It would probably drive them mad in the process. Let's toss another honourable mention in here, and that's going to be for Dead Cells. This is again another game that isn't finished. As to when it's going to be finished, that remains to be seen. But what it's got on display at the moment is pretty damn exceptional. I enjoyed it a great deal because it is a side-scrolling combat-focused roguelite that has a very good combat system. It doesn't start you off in a position that you feel underpowered and limited in terms of your options. It starts you off as a very capable fighter that only gets more capable the further you get into the game. The level design has just enough human element to it, just enough handcrafted feel to it, to ensure that you're not being served up levels that look like they've been generated by a computer. Everything flows and makes sense, and the pacing is correct as a result of that. And you also have a very interesting loot system. There is nothing I hate more than boring loot. There's nothing I hate more than boring upgrades. Dead Cells avoids both of those things, but doesn't necessarily put you in a situation where you are so reliant on stats that you might as well throw your run out of the window because you happen to have the wrong weapon or your numbers are too low. There's a lot of skill involved in success in that game. Gear will help you, but it's certainly not the determining factor. The wide variety of gear also leads to a wide variety of playstyles, which keeps the runs feeling fresh. The game is in something of a state of flux at the moment. Their previous update made some pretty radical changes to the title, and I'll be interested to see which direction they decide to go in before the full-on release. We have seen games like this before take some pretty wild turns, and some of them haven't necessarily been popular changes, at least initially, but that's the real purpose of early access, and Dead Cells up to this point has made good use of that. Number 8. Tooth and Tail. The concept of taking an RTS and simplifying it is difficult. It's been attempted before, and frankly most of the time it simply doesn't work. The reason for that is often that the elements that are simplified were the wrong ones. They were not the elements that were getting in the way of having a good time. They were not the elements that were perhaps putting up a large barrier to entry. They were the elements that people really enjoyed or were so core to the RTS genre that taking them out castrates the game to the point where it isn't interesting anymore. The developers of Tooth and Tail Pocket Watch games believed that they got it right. They believed that they had taken out parts of the RTS genre which made it difficult to learn and intimidating. And I think they got it for the most part correct. They focused on reducing the mechanical complexity. They focused on reducing the amount of things that you had to do per second and per minute. And they reduced the overall complexity of control. This is what defines RTS in the modern era. RTS not really being a particularly large genre anymore outside of StarCraft 2, which is of course a very popular game and is also in many ways defined by its esports scene. The problem that can arise when you define a game that way is that you define it by play at its highest possible level. That's not going to adequately or accurately represent the vast majority of the player base, and catering too much to that high level can create a situation in which the game becomes so inaccessible for a new player and so intimidating that many people simply don't bother. The way that games like StarCraft have got around that is obviously by providing tiered matchmaking and by providing a lot of different game modes, such as the co-op mode, which vastly reduces the demands upon an individual player. In this case, though, Tooth and Tail is a competitive RTS. It is a 1v1 or 2v2 experience, and competitive games inherently will be played at the highest possible level capable by those that are involved in the match itself. What Tooth and Tail manages to do is remove the aspect of RTS which essentially means you've lost before you've even begun, and that is your speed, your mechanics, your ability to keep up with the other guy. If you're not able to keep up with the other player in StarCraft 2, you might as well tap out. No amount of smart thinking is necessarily going to get you out of that, simply because this guy has more money than you do. That means this guy has more dudes than you do, which means this guy is going to beat you. That's such a fundamental element of that game that you have to master it before you get to the rest of it. And unfortunately, the rest of it, as in the complex strategy and trying to outthink your opponent, is what people want access to immediately. They don't get that opportunity in a game like StarCraft 2, but they do in a game like Tooth and Tail, whereby the method of control is simplified to essentially moving a single unit with a flag and using it to construct buildings and lead units in a glorious charge. Now, the game is also thematically very interesting because they decided to go along the route of animals at war, and the purpose of that war is to, disturbingly, eat the opposition. It's to assert their right to eat the other factions. This results in some very interesting possibilities when it comes to the story, and also some very interesting unit analogs when you think that they're trying to translate the core units of the RTS genre into animal units, which is intriguing in and of itself, although you'd be surprised how easy it is to recognize the role of each unit upon seeing it. The games are inherently quick, cutthroat, and to the point, and I think they've done a great job in removing a lot of what's called ladder anxiety from the equation by making these games short and also never putting you on the same map twice. They used a form of procedural generation to create the maps, which does create some unbalanced situations, I will say that. But I think the trade-off for that is interesting in that it does give you a different map every time, and it makes it psychologically easier to forget a loss, wipe the slate clean, and dive into matchmaking once again. Tooth and Tail is probably one of the most successful attempts to simplify the RTS genre. For some people, it's going to simplify it a little bit too much. For some people, it's going to perhaps miss the point of what they enjoyed from RTS, such as, say, large, grand, and complex base building and teching up. That really isn't there. That's been cut down to its barest essentials. However, the game does recognize what makes for competitive real-time strategy, and that a lot of these aspects that people liked 10 years ago or 15 years ago were simply down to the fact that they weren't actually playing the game effectively. They weren't playing it efficiently. They were playing badly, which allowed them to build up this giant base because the other guy decided not to attack them for 30 minutes. That's not what happens in modern competitive RTS, and Tooth and Tail, thankfully, doesn't give in to the notion that it can, and instead tries to simplify it in a way that makes sense, which, in my opinion, for the most part, it has succeeded in doing. Number 7. Mario and Rabbids Kingdom Battle. An unexpected entry, I think, on a lot of people's lists this year, because it came out of nowhere, in theory made no sense whatsoever, and had Rabbids in it, which is usually a downside. In this case, what we actually got was surprisingly good. An Ubisoft-developed title using Nintendo IP, the Mario vs. Rabbids Kingdom Battle game was XCOM Light for many people. It was a turn-based tactics game with a very similar cover system to the reimagined Firaxis XCOM. However, instead of having some large home base and overall meta campaign going on, you had something of a world to explore with various different zones. In between battles, you'd be exploring, trying to find your way to the next area, looking for hidden secrets, collecting as many coins as possible so that you could buy gear to upgrade your little fighting force, which consisted of Mario characters and Rabbids dressed up as Mario characters. You would think there was a real potential for that to get annoying, especially for somebody who was maybe a little bit older. Rabbids, of course, not really aimed at the older demographic, and yet it's actually handled really well, and it probably comes down to some very well animated physical comedy. There's not a great deal of talking that goes on in this game, and yet there are quite a lot of laughs anyway, and they come precisely from that very well animated comedy that's presented through cutscenes. That's a rarity, honestly, in video games. We don't see a lot of that at all, especially not some that's this consistently good. Now, another fear that I had going into this is that because I already play a lot of squad-level turn-based tactics games, I probably wouldn't be all that interested in this due to a lack of depth. Well, there was the potential for that, absolutely, but while it is certainly and objectively simpler than a lot of games like, say, XCOM 2, it is a surprisingly fun game to play regardless, because the rule set is clean, it's well laid out, and it's also surprisingly focused on movement as opposed to hiding behind cover. You're not going to be laying down any devastating fields of fire in this game. You're not going to be suppressing the enemy. Cover is very reliable, to the point where heavy cover makes it literally impossible to actually get hit by incoming fire. But it's moving to that cover and actively flanking your opponent, which is one of the key components of winning the battle. To that end, what they've got is fairly large battlefields, but fairly fast characters with a lot of different movement-focused abilities. For instance, you can slide into an enemy to do damage. You can toss another member of your team through the air. You can utilize pipes to come out halfway across the map behind your opponent. It leads to a surprisingly kinetic turn-based experience, which is fundamentally different to the kind of thing that you would get in XCOM, which is often a very slow advance in the majority of circumstances, being very careful to check your angles and slowly creeping up under the cover of Overwatch. This is a game where you're going to be moving quickly, hitting your enemies fast and hard, and clearing them out as quickly as possible. More simplistic it may be, but fundamentally different it also is to those particular games. It's not simply a watered-down version of other squad-based tactics titles. The whole damn thing is an absolutely charming package. They've got pretty much everything right. Visually, it's colorful, it's bright. In terms of its humor, it's surprisingly funny, which I, as I said, did not expect. And the soundtrack by Grant Kirkhope is absolutely phenomenal. You don't get that close to a Nintendo-style soundtrack without being Nintendo most of the time. Unless, of course, you happen to be Grant Kirkhope, in which case, apparently, you're capable of pretty much anything. This is the game that got by far the most playtime on my Switch this year, and it is a game that shows that with the right team, a really stupid idea can become a really, really great surprise. Number 6. Battlerite. When I first installed Battlerite, I have to admit that the feeling that jumped out at me initially was déjà vu. There's a reason for that. The company that made Battlerite, Stunlock Studios, had tried this before. Something very, very similar to this before, in fact. It was called Bloodline Champions. The idea being that it was a fully skill-focused arena brawler of sorts. You were thrown into a gladiatorial arena. You were given a kit, a set of cooldown-based abilities, and you were expected to fight to the death in 2v2, 3v3, or 5 versus 5 formats. While comparisons at the time were immediately drawn to things like Heroes of New Earth and the original Dota, while League of Legends was starting to find its feet in the scene as well, in reality the game was far closer to something like World of Warcraft's Arena PvP. Gone were any semblance of PvE objectives. This was all about killing the other guy, and once the player was dead, they were out for the rest of the round, and the remaining players would simply have to make do with what they had. Now, what was very interesting about it was that the game focused entirely on the skill of the player involved, not the numerical value of something like, say, gear or random chance. Everything was manually aimed, which included heals, by the way, and every ability had a set amount of damage that it was going to inflict. You couldn't have a heavier piece of armor that would reduce the amount of incoming damage. You couldn't have a magic wand that would increase the amount of damage based on what kind of gear you had. Gear was irrelevant, at least until the end of the life cycle of the game, where they introduced a rather strange talisman/charm system, but it's not really relevant. The main point was that they tried to make something that was about pure arena PvP skill, and it landed simply at the wrong time. I don't really have any other good explanation for it, because the game itself was very solid. There were definitely player-based issues, especially in certain regions, but it was still a good game. They evidently believed that as well, because they decided, rather than going in a completely different direction, they'd try the same thing again with a game called Battlerite. And this time around, they did nail it. For the most part, the game is identical. It's extremely similar. You have characters whose kits were lifted whole cloth from Bloodline Champions. You have concepts that were lifted whole cloth from Bloodline Champions. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But you do have some tweaks here and there that do make it a little bit of a better experience, and also focus on the changing environment that the game finds itself in versus the environment that Bloodline Champions found itself in. Think about the time when BLC came out. It was a time in which streaming was only just starting to find its feet. It wasn't particularly popular. The platforms weren't really there to support it. Esports outside of South Korea was still a very small thing. And as a direct result, it was difficult to get that kind of game out to a large audience. Battlerite instead found itself in a land that was fertile for such things. You had large streamers that were enthusiastic to play and promote it. You had a large audience that was enthusiastic to watch it, especially bearing in mind that it was quite clear the developers had gone out of their way to create a game that was easy to watch, even if you didn't fully understand everything that was going on immediately. It's a clean game. It's obvious as to what is going on. It's obvious as to what an effect does just by looking at it. It also comes along at just the right time where perhaps there's a little bit of fatigue when it comes to these longer games like Dota and League of Legends, where people are finding themselves saying, you know what, 20 to 30 minutes might be too much. That might be too much to commit to one match, particularly if I'm playing with random players who I end up not getting along with. A Bloodline Champions match takes anywhere really between 5 to 10 minutes, and that's really about it. If you end up in there with people you don't like, well, it's not really a big deal. You'll probably never see them again, and you could queue right up and give it another shot. And I found myself doing that over and over and over again this year, just queuing up for 2v2, giving it a shot. Sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't, but even if it was an absolutely disastrous failure, I felt like I'd learned something. I felt like the game had taught me something, and then I could go right back in there and give it another try. I found that ladder anxiety, the notion that you're nervous to queue up again to give it another try, was practically non-existent in Battlerite, and that's what I want. I wanted that bite-sized competitive experience, and that's the place that I went to get it. Frequent updates, a solid free-to-play model based around cosmetics, as well as the ability to get all champions now and forever with a $30 purchase option, works very well. And it also happens to be a game that, at your average level, you don't really need all of the champions. In fact, since it's blind pick, having access to all of the champions really isn't much of an advantage at all. It just gives you more choice as to what you would like to play. When it comes to PvP games this year, I didn't find anything as satisfying as Battlerite, and I never came away from a game feeling like I hadn't learned something. A very solid title, and I certainly wish it every success when it comes to the competitive side of things in 2018. Number 5. Paya. Those of you who know my history with Supergiant games might expect this game to be a little bit higher on the list. It had a number 1. That was all the way back in 2011 for Bastion, and Transistor placed highly as well. Paya finds itself in the middle of the list, and that's by no means a bad thing because rankings mean absolutely nothing. But what I found with Paya is that when it came to the amount of fun that I had with Paya versus, say, the previous 2 titles from Supergiant, it wasn't quite as much. Well, not quite as much. And there was a reason for that. And the main reason for that was the focus on text-based narrative. There's a lot of text in Paya, to the point where calling it a choose-your-own-adventure game, or at least classifying a significant chunk of what constitutes the game as that, would not in any way be unfair. There's a lot of reading involved, and a lot of that is not particularly interactive. Now, when dealing with Supergiant games prior to this, they have created games whereby you are led through the game with a disembodied narrator. And it's a very interesting linear experience that generally, in the story aspect, doesn't have any real replayability. You're going to get most of the same lines, you're going to get pretty much the same story, but the replayability comes in the form of the gameplay mechanics. This time around, I wouldn't say they flipped that on its head, but they have added replayability when it came to the actual narrative, because the narrative is something that, for the first time in a Supergiant game, you have a hell of a lot more control over. Paya is an incredibly unique game when you boil it down to its elements, and when you try to categorize it. It somewhat defies categorization. It's somewhat of a choose-your-own-adventure game, but it's also something of a sports game. It's the first thing that I remember saying to Greg Cassavin when I came out of the booth, having first played the demo version of PAX, and was like, so, you decided to make a sports game then? And that's exactly what they have done with the battle system in this game. Hardly a company that shies away from complex battle systems. Bastion was a relatively basic but extremely competent battle system. Transistor went in all sorts of crazy different directions, with the potential for programming aspects, pausable and real-time combat as well. And this time you have a combat system which is a competitive sports game. And you use the characters that you've been building up and learning about and interacting through the narrative in order to try and win these so-called rituals, these rites, which will allow your characters to eventually escape exile. I don't really want to go any further into the story because there are major spoilers in that respect, and that would be a real shame if you didn't get to experience that for yourself. But this is a game that took some incredible risks when it came to deciding, we're not going to let you keep everybody. We're not going to let you build up your band of merry men and go on adventures forever. Someone is eventually going to have to leave for reasons, and they're good reasons. It's not as if you're being punished, far from it, but the nature of your relationship with your band of companions is going to change as a direct result of that. And it's in itself a very risky notion when dealing with any narratively driven game. You're giving a lot of control over to the player there. The game also happens to be gorgeous, which is exactly what you would expect from a Supergiant game. There's so much going on there. The music is cracking, not like anyone would have expected anything else from Darren Korb, but he's really outdone himself this time. And the thing about Paya, to me, is that it shows that Supergiant is not going to be a studio that will be held down by previous successes. It's not the kind of studio that sits on its laurels, and it's definitely not the sort of studio that says, look, this worked last time, let's just kind of do that again, because we'll sell. We're guaranteed to sell, it'll do well. They're risk takers, real risk takers. And every game they've made has been truly unique as a direct result of that, and I've enjoyed them all for a wide variety of different reasons. I hope they keep doing that, and eventually we may stumble across the first not-so-great Supergiant game, but even if we do, I can guarantee one thing: it might not be great, but it will be interesting. I'll toss another honourable mention in here for Hand of Fate 2. This is a game that has improved in every single aspect over its predecessor, a game that I liked quite a lot. So you might be thinking, well, why doesn't it have a numbered placement on the list? Why just an honourable mention? It really comes down to the albatross around the neck of the game, which is the combat system. I simply can't get past that combat system as the major flaw within the title. I mentioned it in my WTF video, and you can go and listen to the specific criticism if you wish, but it basically boils down to the idea that there's no decision-making involved in the combat. It all comes down to numbers and timing. There are no combos, there are no movesets to learn, there is no nuance to the combat system, and yes, okay, they added dual wielding, they added two-handed weapons, they varied things up a little bit there, but just adding more stuff doesn't make the system more complicated, it doesn't make the system more interesting, nuanced, and layered. And the problem is that the best part of the game is the part where you're not fighting, but you're spending quite a lot of time doing the fighting, so I did enjoy it. I really did. I spent a good amount of time with it, but every time I went into a fight, I was just sort of rolling my eyes and saying, well, I hope this one's over quick, which isn't really what you want in top 10 of the year material, but it's still a cracking game, and I know there's a lot of people that disagree with me on the combat, and if you do, then more power to you, because it's probably in your top 10 as a result. Number 4. Total War Warhammer 2. Well, here's an improvement on the predecessor in pretty much every possible respect in a series that I like a lot, in a universe that I like a lot. I'd like Warhammer 40,000 more, but I'll deal with the end times era of Warhammer Fantasy Battle. That's reasonable enough, as long as we don't go too much towards that Age of Sigmar nonsense. Total War Warhammer 2 comes along with a brand new set of races, a brand new campaign that has a campaign objective that solves one of the biggest problems that Total War games have had for, frankly, decades. And that is, when the hell do they bloody end? When is the definitive conclusion of a Total War campaign? In many cases, it just sort of fizzles out. You get to the point where either you can't win, so you might as well give up, or you're so powerful that the conclusion is foregone. So you're wasting your time just clearing everybody off the map to eventually get to the end screen, and that is wasted time that isn't enjoyable or challenging for you. Now, with Total War Warhammer 2, what they decided to do was create a campaign whereby you're always racing towards this end objective, and the first person to complete the end objective is the person that wins the game. And you have to do something about that if somebody is ahead of you. You have to try and interfere. You're constantly forced to stay on the ball and try and keep up with everybody else. That is a surprisingly good decision. That has made the game much, much more compelling for me. That has created a Total War game whose campaign I actually want to finish, which is rare enough in and of itself. Total War continues to make improvements across the board. In this case, it has a fantastic set of unique factions, all with a bunch of really interesting mechanics and a wide variety of awesome units to play with, which is what you want in a fantasy version of Total War. You need to really pull out all the stops. You need the big monsters, the dragons, the phoenix, the hell-pit abominations, the doom wheels. You want absolute chaos and destruction on a grand scale, which is what Total War Warhammer 2 provides in spades. You want a game that runs better than the last one did, which it does. You want a game with a better UI than the last one did, which it has. You want a game that is far less buggy than the last one was, and they managed to achieve that. By no means is Total War Warhammer 2 a perfect game. It's a similar situation to last year when I was talking about how much I really enjoyed Civ 6. And some of the feedback I got from that was, well, how is that possible knowing that the AI is brain dead? If it's possible to enjoy the game despite the fact that the AI is brain dead, then as far as I'm concerned, you've got something really special on your hands there. And it would be fantastic if the AI was much, much better than it was. And hopefully, they continue to improve that, not only across the Total War series, which certainly needs it, but also other games like Civilization 6 and so on and so forth. Regardless of this fact, the game still has enough going on to make the game interesting and engaging over a long period of time. And that is good enough for me, as an average gamer, as somebody who is not an expert by any means when it comes to these sort of things. I can still have a really, really good time with it. I will be interested to see what's going to happen with the life cycle of Total War Warhammer 2. We already know that there was a big expansion coming with the Rise of the Tomb Kings, which adds, well, the Tomb Kings faction to the game. And while that is a pricey expansion, it also looks like the faction itself is extremely well fleshed out, and interaction with said faction adds a wide variety of different mechanics and ideas that will also affect every other faction in the game. They've changed their strategy around a bit. They've stopped spending time making these small campaigns because apparently, according to their data, nobody played them. And while you could argue that, yes, over the course of the year, you probably are going to end up spending $120 on Total War Warhammer 2, the question is, are you going to get enough hours, quality hours, out of it to justify that? And are those factions going to be well enough fleshed out? The hope is yes, and I'm looking forward to trying out the Tomb Kings expansion in the not-too-distant future. Number 3. XCOM 2 War of the Chosen. You can call it an expansion pack if you like, but frankly, if you look at the feature list, this might as well be XCOM 3. There is so much going on with this thing. It is packed with features from stem to stern, and frankly, it's got to be one of the biggest expansion packs that's ever been released by a company over the last few years. A big, traditional $40 expansion pack. This thing is the real deal. It changes so much while keeping the core of the game intact. It adds so many more options while also ensuring that there's plenty of new challenges to balance out the new abilities that you have at your disposal. It changes the flow of the game completely. It sets you up in a situation whereby you have a real nemesis constantly chasing you, sometimes up to 3 at a time. You feel like you, as XCOM, are being hunted, which is, I might add, something that I think's been missing from the previous XCOM titles. If you go all the way back to things like UFO and Terror from the Deep, you felt like you were being hunted as an organization. Well, frankly, that's because you were. Your base could be attacked. You weren't really safe. By the addition of these 3 immortal assassins that are constantly trying to gain intel from your soldiers, hunt your base down, sabotage it, you get that feeling once again that you are not, in fact, safe at any point during your missions, whether it be on the Avenger or out in the field. One of the things that I enjoyed most about War of the Chosen is that it gave a huge number of different decisions to the player while hanging around on the Avenger between missions. These could dictate the entire strategy for a month's worth of campaign. These could put valuable troops in harm's way. There was a lot of risk-reward involved in that as well. And it did make the base feel a hell of a lot more relevant than it has in the previous games. When it came to soldier customization, they gave you an awful lot more freedom as well. The amount of extra skill customization that you could have with your different troops, particularly when dealing with the rebel factions, who had a whole suite of different abilities just waiting for you to play around with, resulted in your tactical options once you hit the battlefield being almost endless. But then that's also how I would describe the enemy hordes that are headed at you. They're very smart, they've got a lot of abilities to deal with you as well, and you are going to need every last one of those special abilities in order to survive. If I had one complaint, and it's probably the thing which is holding it back from being number 1 this year, it's that the addition of the Lost faction, which is a faction of zombies that are attracted to noise and will attack both your troops and the Advent, was honestly something that did nothing more than slow the game down. They weren't interesting to engage, they are not in any way varied when it comes to their enemy models or their effects, and usually they simply serve to slow a mission down to an absolute crawl. Efforts were made to mitigate it with the quick headshot mechanics allowing you to just blow away one zombie after another, but it doesn't matter because there's really not all that much tactical going on when dealing with the Lost Hordes. They end up being an uninteresting nuisance, a dangerous one, but an uninteresting nuisance nonetheless. So that does hold it back. Outside of that, though, I got another full playthrough out of it. I'll probably play again with the extra options that are available here. It really did give a new lease of life to a game that already had a ton of extra content, especially when it came to the Long War 2 mod that was available. It's got a lot of life left in it, and those of you who are worried about the performance, which of course the first iteration of the game did have problems with, they were able to fix that with the expansion, although it is an unfortunate reality that they were not able to retroactively apply those fixes to the original game. Here's a little honorable mention. I'm going to give it to Fortnite Battle Royale, and the reason I'm going to do that is that I'm not particularly into Battle Royale games. I don't spend an awful lot of time with them, but the one that I spent the most time with was Fortnite, and it allowed me to gain some perspective on why people like that particular genre, why it is as popular as it is, but it also allowed me to do so in a way that wasn't wasting a huge amount of my time. PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds is described by many people as being something of a walking simulator, and I can't really blame them for that. There is an awful lot of walking around in that game, and it's also a game in which you can get shot and killed from God knows how far away, and then that's your play session done. You may have accomplished absolutely nothing in the process. A lot of people seem to really dig that level of tension. I don't. I don't really like my time being wasted. I like quality time out of my games, and PUBG has never offered me that. Fortnite Battle Royale, while certainly not being a perfect game at all, I have had much better experiences with, especially in duos, simply because it's a faster game and you're generally not being picked off from a mile away by a guy with a sniper rifle. And I'll take that. In the words of many, I'm too old for this shit. I'm sorry. I can see why you like it. I really can. It's just not for me. It really isn't. And if you're going to find me in a current Battle Royale game, it'll be Fortnite, and it certainly won't be PUBG. Number 2. Persona 5. It sat on my shelf for longer than expected. Persona 4 was a game I didn't expect to enjoy, and then ended up beating with the true ending. That's over 100 hours of gameplay on the Vita. It was a really unique experience, something I had no idea that I was going to love as much as I did. So along comes Persona 5, and I'm thinking, oh great, I could sit down and play it, and for months it just sat on the shelf, and I just never got into it, and I think the reason was that I know how Persona games get. They have really, really slow starts. They have very, very linear starts, to the point where you might as well not be doing anything yourself. You might as well be in a 7-hour cutscene where you occasionally press A and maybe move a bit. That's a bit off-putting. So maybe that was why. Maybe that was why it took so long to get into it. But I finally did. And I don't regret it for a second. There is something about Persona. Maybe it's the music. Gets stuck in your head. It's an earworm. You can't get rid of it. Maybe it's the incredible presentation. Anyone that skipped over the UI and the way that Persona 5 was presented in any sort of award remotely related to that in 2017 is adult. I mean, are you blind? Look at that thing. That's just mind-blowing, the way that they were able to convey so much through an ultra-stylized but incredibly usable UI. Was it the scale of the game, the sheer amount of stuff that's going on? Was it the vast improvements when it came to the size of the dungeons, the intricacy of the dungeons, the improvements in combat? Was it the awesome cast of characters that you got to know and interact with? Was it the incredible variety of activities that you got to go and spend time with them doing? Was it something as simple as making a decision that you're gonna go to the baths today, or you're going to go fishing today, or you're gonna go study in the library today? Persona 5, and every Persona game really, has done this unbelievable job of melding the mundane with the magical and making something out of that which is completely unique in the space. And one of those things really feeds the other. One doesn't work without the other. If you have the mundane without the magical, then it's simply a boring life simulator. If you have the magical without the mundane, it's just a JRPG dungeon crawler. You need both. One grounds the other. One gives context to the other. There's something weirdly comforting about Persona, something that I don't get out of other games, and I think it is because it's grounded in the life of this character. Unlike so many other games, you know, he's a regular person with powers, and, well, he's got to go to bed, and he's got to study for his exams, and he's got to learn how to interact with people without being an awkward sod. He's got to get a job, he's got to learn how to make coffee, he's got to learn how to make curry. That's something about that is welcoming and homely. And that's what I got every time I turned Persona 5 on. And that was what made me want to turn it back on. That's what made me compelled to turn it back on and play another few hours in the session. And I don't get that from anything else, I don't think, on the gaming market at the moment, and there probably won't be anything else, at least not in the near future, that's able to achieve that. Another quick honorable mention to the person that's posting all of these in a list without context on some forum somewhere and causing untold numbers of arguments. If you want to really mess with them, the best thing you can do is just start arbitrarily swapping the numbers around. Like, nothing too obvious. Maybe move the 5 to the 6 or the 9 to the 7 or something. If you do that, then I think you could cause some real trouble. So give that a shot. Number 1. Invisigun Heroes. It's been a long list. Some of you may have forgotten the criteria. The criteria being, which game did I have the most fun with this year? And there's no question in my mind that it doesn't belong to any of the big AAA blockbusters. It doesn't belong to any of the excellent and successful indie titles this year. It doesn't belong to any of the games that have really risen from the ashes and truly become what they were promised to be. No, it belongs to a game that basically nobody bought. It belongs to a game that has so few actual players and owners that Steam Spy's numbers may not actually be accurate. They're too far outside of the margin of error. I mean, it could be that no one has ever played this game other than the people that I played it with. I don't know. But it's a game that we stumbled across in a release list for the Co-optional podcast at one point. And I thought it looked pretty interesting. And the game came out and we tried it. And it was, and I'm not using hyperbole when I say this, one of the most original games I've ever played in my life. Why was it original? Well, it was original because it took a concept that almost no game has tried before, which is the idea that everybody is invisible, and then executed it to absolute perfection. Invisigun Heroes is a game in which everybody playing the game is invisible. They have an Invisigun that allows them to kill the opponent. However, if they fire the Invisigun, they will be visible for a short period of time. So, risk-reward system involved in that. The trick is, you can't see yourself either. This is not some split-screen-like game whereby you can see where you are. No, you can't see yourself, which means that you can get very easily disoriented. And it's the disorientation part of it, and trying to keep track of where you are, that makes the game really interesting. If you have no idea where you are, you're probably going to end up bumping into things. You might end up in the crossfire. You might end up running into the middle of a lake. And, well, what happens when you do that? Well, you make a bunch of noise. You walk through a bush and you're going to see the bush rustle. You run into a block and that block is going to flash your color. You leave footprints in the snow, for God's sake. And that's the sort of thing that can be used by your opponents to slowly hunt you down. It's a game of cat and mouse where everybody is simultaneously the cat and the mouse, but the means by which they win is also the means by which they reveal their position. This game, as a multiplayer game online or as a game that's played on the same couch, is a riot. I know there are a lot of games that have attempted to capture that particular market, and a lot of them fail, and occasionally you've got these big successes, things like Towerfall, and Invisigun comes along with this incredible idea, this unbelievable, interesting, innovative idea. It's so well executed and is packed with features and levels and different modes and huge amounts of content, and everything is just polished to a mirror shine. And nobody gets it. And why don't they get it? Well, it's actually, in a cruel twist, the game's fault. It's because you can't see it. It's almost impossible to convey why Invisigun is fun without actually playing Invisigun. You can't convey it through visual means because you can't see anything. Everything's invisible. We tried this on stream, and it was such an incredible phenomenon. I've never seen such a split right down the middle when it came to viewership. We had half the viewership hating the game because they couldn't see the players. And then we had half the viewership saying, I love this game because I'm trying to keep an eye on where the tells are. You know, are there footprints in the snow there? Who's over here? Trying to guess where everybody is based on what they've done. But the game, by necessity, communicates information in the poorest possible way. And in 2017, and really over the last few years as a result of YouTube and Twitch, we've got to the point where that's actually a death sentence for a game for a wide variety of reasons. Now, some people have argued, me being one of them, and I think there's probably a lot more reasons behind this, but I think one of the main reasons that Battleborn fell so flat on its damn face was that it was impossible to see what was going on stream. You wanted to watch someone play Battleborn, you want to watch your favorite streamer play it, it's just a color riot, it's a mess. It's a mess on YouTube as well. You can't see what's going on, you can't properly process the information. And while Invisigun is actually very well laid out, it's all on one screen, it's top down, it's got a really crisp pixel art style, it's very clear, everybody's invisible! So how are you possibly supposed to communicate that to the viewer? Well, as it turns out, the developer actually had an idea on that. It was a very specific idea, and that was to create a second client that streamers could use that had a delay on it, whereby you could stream a version that showed where people were, but it was all mixed up and flipped around so that you couldn't use it to stream cheat, and then you could play it that way. And we actually did, in fact, play it that way. And what you're seeing on the stream right now, what you're seeing on the screen, is footage of what happened there. And for the viewers, it was a much better experience. For us, of course, we were playing the same game we always had, and the game that we'd always enjoyed. And, God, I have never played a game where I've screamed so much. I've never played a game where I've felt so much goddamn joy or elation, because it's so tense all the time. It's so much fun to play all the time. You can feel like an idiot, and you can feel like the smartest guy in the universe, all in the same round. The game's got over 60 maps. It's got modifiers for the existing game modes. It has so much damn replayability for such a low price, and you're even able to now play a guest edition, which means that you can play with people that own the game and get access to content that you didn't have previously. There is a demo available. There's not many games that I feel the need to evangelize for, to really get on the pulpit for and preach. And Invisigun is one of those. And as much as I think that its relative failure is self-inflicted, the failure is perhaps unavoidably self-inflicted simply through the risks that they took. I don't know if there was a way to avoid that. It's just the nature of the beast. It's the nature of the way the game works. If you take that away, you take away what makes the game so damn special and unique in the first place. You can't do that. So sometimes I guess there's gonna be a game that just isn't a commercial success. It's just a niche little game that tried a bunch of really cool things, and if you can convince a few people to sit down and play it, if you can convince them to give it a shot, the chances are they will absolutely adore it, but it's getting past that barrier. And you know, maybe there's a way past that barrier now. Maybe there's a big old sledgehammer that we can use to break that particular wall down, and maybe that sledgehammer is called the Switch. Maybe the Nintendo Switch is the place where this actually ends up being a success, rather than the PC. Maybe the PC was the wrong place to go with it. It's such an interesting case study. I would love to see some postmortems of this later on down the line, especially when talking about things like YouTube and streaming culture and how they've been used to great success for some games, but in the case of possibly something like Invisigun Heroes, to its detriment through no real fault of its own. There was no malice there. There was no intent to cause failure. It just doesn't work in that particular visual medium. But it worked for me on a gameplay level. I'll tell you that for a fact. It worked for me as a game that I had an absolute riot with. It worked for me as a game that left my heart pumping all the time, and it worked for me as a game that once I'd finished a session with my friends, I came off just feeling a hell of a lot happier than when I'd gone in. And that's, if anything, what a couch competitive game is all about, right? That's got to be the essence of it, surely. And this is one of the most original of that type of game that has ever existed and probably ever will. Let me just encourage you, don't necessarily rely on what you've seen in the background. Don't necessarily even rely on what you've heard from the VOD of the screaming and the whooping and the yelling, and just maybe try the demo out. Get a couple of friends together, give it a shot. Join their Discord. They organize some games sometimes. They have a small but dedicated community. It's just something different. And originality isn't the key to success. More often than not, it can be quite the opposite of that. And it's not even necessary to make a good game. But in this case, it is so unique. And it deserves to be tried. It deserves to be experienced. Like, you owe it to yourself to give it a bash. Give it a shot. Put aside 10 minutes of your life and see whether or not it's for you. Why not? What have you got to lose, right? What do you have to lose? Invisigun Heroes is my game of the year of 2017, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for watching and putting up with a long wait for this video. You probably noticed which parts of the video were done on days when I was not feeling good, and which parts of the video were done on days where I was feeling better. It's taken actually 3 weeks to put this video together when I really should have been able to do it in a day and a half. But as you're probably aware, my health has been a real mess as of late. I'd like to say I'm feeling better, and that wouldn't be a lie. I am, actually. I'm feeling quite a bit better, especially having now finished this. This was a bit of a mountain for me to climb, and I feel pretty good finding myself at the top of it. And hopefully, in 2018... with a few plans here and there and a few changes to the way that we do things, we can find more really cool games and share them with you, because that's really what I want to do. I think I started doing that in 2017. It was limited by my health, but I want to try and do it again in 2018, and maybe with a little help from my friends, that might be possible. Thank you very much for your support, ladies and gentlemen. It is, as always, very much appreciated. I'll see you next time.
You can't touch the... Aww.
Oh, fuck.
Oh, man.
Oh, it's respawn.
Yes, you respawn in this. Otherwise, that wouldn't really work.
You have to hold the ball for like a certain.
I know I'm trying to get the ball, but he keeps shooting me.
He's got the ball. He's got the ball. Pose the man card. They can't see me. They can't. Oh, they can. Okay.
Did I kill myself? Oh, no. I'm alive.
A question we often ask ourselves. You
you're...
ride the fucking ball like a clown. I love it.
Yeah, you're a lot
faster. Looks like
faster
you can drop it as well if you want to.
Oh!
Just ruined. All of you just lined up. Come get me, come get me, come get me, come get me. Oh.
I got you.
Oh, you got
That's what you wanted me to do, right?
Yeah, you did. Yeah, I mean, you did his last. That's good.
Oh, wait a second.
So 60 seconds is the magical number.
Yeah.
Yeah. 60 seconds total. I've got 15 right now. Oh, shit.
Give me the ball. Ah!
This is a cool variant. I like it. I think it's like a risk you definitely get locked into. Only play survival. Only play survival. But
You can't, if you use a power, apparently you jump off.
Yeah, if you use the power,
shoot,
it
yeah.
goes away.
Oh, so you can jump off and then use it to kill someone, then jump back on.
Right.
Yeah. Just good luck with
Woo!
that.
Woo! Well, if you get good at it, get him, get the fucker, get him, get the bastard, get him, fucking clown bastard, dude.
I'm the master of the ball.
No.
Whoop, whoop,
He's the cream of the crop poo. Get him.
Don't shoot me! I'm trying to kill him!
No.
Don't make me laugh, TV. I can't play when you
Get
make
that
me
fuck.
laugh.
Get that fuck.
Oh, I got bubble suit.
No. Oh, fuck. He's even faster now. Shit.
Just
Get
call
back.
me Barry Sand. Oh. Oh!
It's mine. It's mine. It's mine.
I had 3 seconds.
Come get me. Come get me. Come get me, Cobber. You can't catch me, Cobber. See? Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Nope, you can't make me laugh. It's up there.
Yes. Run speed. Yeah. No, fuck. Get him back. Get him
We
back.
saw the ball.
Get the fucker. Get him.
I can't hit him. He's too fast.
I know I'm trying!
That run speed. I can't hit him.
Yes,
What the
yes,
fuck?
Yes.
Somebody
yes,
hit him.
Yes. No.
I'm trying, yes! No!
Ooh, hey!
I killed him, but then you killed him.
Yeah.
Oh god, my computer's like derping.